Saturday, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of our special series within the Furthermore podcast. Furthermore with Amanda Head is my regular podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we started this Saturday series called Small Business Saturday because many of you know that I have a heart for shopping small. I love supporting businesses whose values align with mine. And a lot of these businesses are companies that just barely survived coming out of COVID. And I think that it's important to highlight these businesses because I want them to survive. America has been taken over by large corporations. Even some of those businesses out there that you think are small businesses have been gobbled up under, Unilever, and some of Burt's Bees is one of the best examples of this. Used to be, family run, family owned, and then they got gobbled up by a larger conglomerate. So I want to focus in this series on shopping small. I think it's important. I think it is one of the most effective ways that we can speak volumes with our wallet. So today I am so excited to have on the podcast Ian Smith. So some of you might have known about his story during COVID. He is now the co-owner of Summit Rejuvenation. He is a men's and a fitness coach. He's also the author of a book called Find Your Hill. But he is the former co-owner of Atillis Gym in New Jersey. And a lot of you saw his story where he was trying to keep his gym open during COVID because many of us, I guess throughout the pandemic, so many of us recognized that going to the gym, keeping our bodies healthy, that was the way to defend ourselves against COVID, not by, masking up and staying inside and avoiding being around people and avoiding being in healthy environments. So we are going to highlight his story. He just had a major, major win in the court system. So we're going to talk about that, a little bit of his background, which, by the way, is not all triumph. Like many of us, he has dealt with a lot of things in his past. As he admits, he's made some wrong decisions. And hello, isn't that everybody's story? So we're going to talk with him in just a few moments. But first, we're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Small Business Saturday here at Furthermore with Amanda Head. I'm delighted that you all have joined me on this weekend. As many of you know, I love supporting small businesses. I especially love supporting businesses whose values align with mine. I just think that that's one of the best ways that we can speak out in this country. We can do it by speaking with our wallet. Really, money talks, and that is one of the best ways that we can send messages in culture, in government, across the board. And when it comes to culture and government, my next guest is someone who has been on the, unfortunately, the victim end, certainly, of the government, but he overcame and he became the victor, and I am so delighted to have him on the show. Ian Smith, many of you probably know his face. You probably heard his story from, 4 years ago. Co-owner of Atillis Gym. He's also the co-owner of Summit Rejuvenation. He's a fitness and men's coach. He's an author. Ian, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Happy to be here.
So, I went back actually and watched some of your old interviews from when everything transpired. And for my audience, they might be familiar a little bit with your story, but can you just remind everybody, how this all began? Obviously, during COVID, the ridiculous restrictions, especially when it came to things like gyms that are healthy places where people go to get healthier. Tell us your story.
Sure. So, I was a personal trainer for years. It was something I was very passionate about. I got into fitness in my early 20s, and I built a huge personal training business in South Jersey, and eventually bought myself a gym along with my former co-partner. I actually sold the gym to him entirely and wound up moving to Florida. But nonetheless, we opened a gym, and it was a huge project. It was pretty much a dumpster fire when we bought it, but we knew exactly what we needed to do to be a successful small business in the community. And that was kind of give back, work hard, and offer great value and help people and care about the community. And we were wildly successful within the first couple of months. And 9 months into dumping our life savings essentially into this gym and working tirelessly to improve it and to make it a successful business, along came the COVID boogie monster.
Yep.
So he and I were not super happy about the idea, very skeptical of it. But at the end of the day, we didn't know enough to confidently say no. The last thing that we would want to do is hurt anybody. So we paid attention and we stayed working, but we did close down, and very quickly things didn't add up. Obviously, neither the science nor the politics. We watched Capitol Hill kind of punt the ball back and forth in the never-ending Republican Democrat political theater battle that they do everything with. And we took online to a lot of academic studies and stuff about COVID, and what we were seeing was drastically different than what we were being told on the news. And so we kind of came to the conclusion on day 11 when they passed the economic stimulus bill to the tune of 2.3, I believe $2.4 trillion. We took a look at that, and there was enough red flags in there in those 1,000 pages for us to say we're not going to be victims of whatever this is, because we didn't know the big picture at that time. It was just, hey, this doesn't feel right, and then the red flags were plentiful. So we reopened our gym 2 months to the day of our initial closure. We took 6 weeks from that decision, and we put together a comprehensive safety protocol plan that went not only matched what essential businesses were doing, but went way over the top, to the point that every member in our gym who entered had their own spray bottle. All machines were sprayed before and after use. We separated the gym, so nothing was more than 6 feet. Nothing was closer than 6 feet, and air scrubbers, you name it, we did it. And then we opened our gym. And the governor, Phil Murphy, did not like that, even though that when we opened, we told the local police department, we notified the local township and the state in hopes that they would perhaps come and talk to us and maybe come to a sensible reopening plan. Obviously, that didn't happen. So we started to accrue some municipal citations the first couple of days. They were coming in like 5 or 10 at a time. And then health department shutdown order came that basically said you're closed because coronavirus. There was not a single piece of science or data in there. And if you remember, many of the blue state governors and the COVID proponents, that was like their mantra: science and data. We follow the science and the data. And that we said, where's the science and the data? Oh, there's none in here, so we ignored that. And then it just escalated from there. It got increasingly worse. Eventually, a court order was put against us by a judge in New Jersey. And for those of you who aren't Jersey natives, our judges in that state are appointed and not elected. So they answer to politicians and not to people. And he just so happened to be up for tenure that year. Of course, he did get it. But that court order is where a lot of the big, very punitive punishments that a lot of people are aware of, for those who did follow the story, came from. The $15,000 a day fine that accumulated to millions of dollars, the emptying of our bank accounts to the tune of $200,000, the suspension of my PayPal, my Venmo, my Cash App, everything like that, as well as the arrests, the 4 criminal charges that we each were charged with that carried up to 5 years in prison. And you name it, everything else that came from there. So 2 years into it, we finally had our first very small victory, and now 4 years into it, we've achieved another small but incredibly significant victory.
Yeah. I was writing down notes because I have so much to ask you about. First of all, the monetary punishment that you received, all in all, how much did this whole debacle cost you?
We stopped counting after we hit the first million in terms of the fines. It was $15,497.76 per day for every day that we were open, not in full, but against the court order, because that's where all the punishment really came from. All these municipal charges didn't really mean anything.
Right. It was court.
Yeah, they're just citations. They're akin to traffic tickets. But the court order is now a violation of the judge's order. So from the day of the court order, or for the day of him deciding that, for probably another 6 months, we got a $15,000 a day fine. So whatever the math is on that, it's more than 1 million. And we just kind of stopped counting. because we had no
I
plans
mean,
to
at that point,
pay
what's the
any of
point?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. It becomes monopoly money. I've never seen $1 million in my life.
Right.
You know, and I'm definitely not going to pay it to the state. Even if I did have it, I'd bury it or burn it before I gave it to the government.
Amen. Amen. I love that mentality. So what is there any recourse for you as far as the monetary side of things?
So, and that's only the punitive monetary side. That doesn't include the $750,000 in legal bills that we've
Of
had.
course.
The state pulled us into 4 different courts, I believe, altogether. We were in 5. The federal courts didn't even want to hear it. We had a coward of a judge kind of kick it
Wow.
back into the state courts, knowing that we were fighting the state in the state-controlled courts. But, you know, that's how justice works, at least in the beginning of the judicial system. You have to fight for every little bit you get, because the system isn't designed to help you fight the government in any way, shape, or form.
No.
So the current win, like I said, small but significant, is the complete dismissal with prejudice of all of those 80 plus citations that my former partner and I had.
Yeah.
And those range from violation of governor's orders, disturbing the peace, zoning violations, public and dare reckless behavior, whatever they were. So those,
And
like I said,
with
those
prejudice means donezo, can't ever be brought again.
yes. For anybody unfamiliar with legalese, it means the state can never revisit those charges in any circumstance. And they were dismissed by a municipal judge, a woman who just read the law as it is, called a spade, and called strikes, and balls. And it had been 4 years, so she dismissed it based on the fact that they violated our right to a speedy trial.
Yeah.
And that they didn't have the authority to issue some of these charges. So to answer the question, those charges were part of the basis of this court order, and all of the real punitive stuff came from that. So now that they've all been dismissed with prejudice, there is certainly an opportunity and conversations to be had about what are the next steps in terms of, first of all, going back and revisiting this court order and the punishments attached to it and say, is this valid? And you know, I would say no. So there's an opportunity for that, for remedy in terms of, you know, getting back what has essentially been stolen from us. And then there is a secondary battle after that, which is remedy for the injustices and you know, getting relief for the pain and suffering that they've caused us, the lost income, you know, the violation of our rights, you name it. So there's
the
2
lawsuits
definite
fly.
battles. Yeah. And those things will take time, unfortunately. I mean, it took us 4 years for the courts to even acknowledge the fact that, hey, maybe you shouldn't have issued these guys 80 tickets for opening their gym, especially now that it's public knowledge, even though I think it was common knowledge at the time that we weren't doing anything wrong. So battle number 1 is to destroy the court order and invalidate it. And then battle number 2 beyond that is seeking remedy for the injustices against us.
Yeah. Did it surprise when Anthony Fauci went up to Capitol Hill and testified, going back to what you were saying about that initial relief package that you guys read, and you were like, there's no data and science here. And but consistently throughout the entire pandemic, it was follow the science. I am the science. This is the data. When in fact, we now know from Anthony Fauci's testimony, the 6-foot rule, I think that the way he phrased it, he said it just kind of appeared. There was no scientific basis for any of this.
There was no scientific basis for masking. There was no scientific basis for the arrows up and down the one-way grocery store aisles. There was no scientific basis for PCR testing. You know, that was one of the things that was a huge red flag for us, is Anthony Fauci is telling everybody to go get tested, even if you're not having symptoms, which is the most ludicrous idea I've ever heard. You know, even you don't have to be a doctor to go, wait, so I'm sick, but I'm not sick. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the early things that we figured out is we wanted to know what a PCR test was. And a PCR test is used for research purposes, not for diagnosis. You know, it's something that takes a small piece of what you're trying to study and it blows it up. It's not a pass fail test. So things like that were red flags for us. we were some of the early adopters. There was a group of people who were kind of onto this from the beginning, that helped us not only educate us, but we educated ourselves on it. And that became more and more public knowledge for anybody who was against the tyrannical lockdowns. Is we all knew this stuff, so hearing Anthony Fauci say it is surprising, only that I thought he would never admit it. Not
Right.
surprising in terms of the information that he disclosed.
Right. Yeah. I remember back, I mean, just speaking of some of the ludicrous claims, I remember how married and in love the left was with COVID. This is how I
Oh,
knew
yeah.
that they were never going to let this go, is when they started saying that being asymptomatic is actually a symptom of COVID. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the mental gymnastics that are required for that are actually impressive. Like
Yeah.
to be able to come to that conclusion, you've got to be, there's got to be a ton of space in your head for your brain cells to jump around.
Yeah.
To be able to do those type of gymnastics.
So do you think, so first of all, were there tons of COVID cases that came as a result of your gym?
So actually, we put in place, one of the safety protocols that we put in place was that we did have our own contact tracing system. Our members voluntarily did a forehead scan of their temperature every day. They all signed in, registered their temperature, and we put it on a little piece of paper. And we collected those until we hit, I think, over 1 million visits.
Wow.
We have there's a storage unit, I believe, that I'm sure it's still there, full of little slips that have every single day that we were open. And we used to make videos about it. And as the pile got bigger, at one point we didn't have anywhere to put it in the gym, so it was just in the corner, and it was a stack of papers. And there's a video somewhere.
People could use it for plyo. What is it called? Plyometrics?
Yeah, they could do box jumps on it, absolutely. Or just throw it in like a backpack and do a ruck or whatever. So we knew that there was not going to be any cases, and to be careful, because we didn't know what these people were going to try to do or say, or what they were going to prepare in court. And we were very, and rightfully, paranoid that they would probably try to send somebody in or something like that. So we wanted to have the whole point of opening was not to, we didn't open with a middle finger salute to the government. We said, hey, you guys are messing this up. You guys are destroying people's lives. And if you can't figure it out, we will. And if this is what we have to do to keep people safe, we'll do it. So we did those things. And long story short, in all those papers, there's not a single case. And we've invited Governor Murphy and Judith Persa-Kelly at the health department to come and do an audit. Find somebody who's sick, and they never did.
What I think is lost in this story is the fact that, because of what we all didn't know at the beginning of COVID, you guys did your due diligence, and you were willing to at your own expense, pay for the temperature monitors, pay for the COVID tests, all of the mitigation factors, the spray bottles for every customer. You guys were willing to do that, to work within the bounds of safety. It was the government who forced your hand and forced you into a position where you had to start fighting back. I am here with Ian Smith. Many of you know him as the former co-owner of Atillis Gym in New Jersey. We're going to be back with him in just a few moments. Welcome back, everybody, to this special edition, Small Business Saturdays, within my Furthermore podcast. Thank you all so much for being here. Ian, I want to get back to what we were talking about before, because I asked you, I said, so were there a bunch of COVID cases that happened as a result of people coming to your gym? And of course, there wasn't a single one. So why do you think they targeted you? Obviously, I know it's because you were doing what I think was perfectly reasonable during a pandemic, which is trying to keep people healthy. But do you feel like you were on the receiving end of a lot of this because it was political?
Oh, absolutely. This was something that blue state governors called them, even though there was plenty of Republican governors who kind of let it happen, and acted like they were just powerless to stop, local authorities and county authorities from shutting things down. But this was their mission. This was these people are nothing more than foot soldiers in a bigger war. You know, they're the people that we know and that we can name and that we can identify, but these guys are just, they're foot soldiers. So they were carrying out their mission, and their mission was to lock the states down for as long or forever as possible. You know, so yeah, we were absolutely, you know, because we were so loud about it, and because we had a series of very fortunate events. You know, when I announced on my Instagram, I think it was really right time, right message. We were 7 weeks in, and I think the first or like the second wave of people who were starting to go like, you know what, this is bogus. Yeah. Really caught on to the message, and we had the very, very fortunate opportunity to go on Tucker Carlson. So we weren't the only business to open. There were a lot of people around the country, and even some who beat us to it. Like Lou Uridell at Metroflex Metroflex Gym in California. Forgetting her name, Shelley Luther, who opened her salon in Texas.
That's right.
But we loudest, and we were in a state where the governor really wanted to fight, and because we had so much attention, I think their hand was forced into not being able to quietly shut us down and sort of opening this 4-year war against us, and to be as extreme as it was, because it was something that they needed to quiet down, and they couldn't, no matter what, but they tried, and that's where all the ludicrous punishments come from. I mean, these people hung 5 years in jail over our head for taking the doors off of our gym, from preventing them, or to prevent them from locking our gym. That was 4.5 years of prison time that they were asking for. So yeah, it was very political. It was very targeted, but we welcomed it, because we didn't want those things, but we understood that this was going to be part of the process. That when you are right and the state is wrong, that's a dangerous position to be in, because the state is going to do what the state always does, and I mean state as in government entity in general. Yeah. So we knew these things were coming, and the only plan we really had was, will we accept, you know, our fate in being sort of targeted, under the premise that we can show everybody how crazy these people are, and to what extent they'll go to in order to ensure our compliance. So we kind of knew that they would come after us, but we were okay as long as we could show people, you know, and let people just see it with their own eyes. And that plan really worked, because ultimately they ran out of punches to throw, and they sort of gassed themselves out. And, you know, Murphy had more egg on his face than like a circus clown. You know, so the plan worked. It was the only option we really had.
Phil Murphy is real piece of work. The nicest way I can say it. There is a business, or there was a business here in Los Angeles that's only a couple miles from my house, called Tin Horn Flats, and you've probably heard.
Flats, yeah.
They got
and
they were another. Yeah, so it started out because they have main doors on their business, but they also had saloon doors, and so they did the same thing. They took the main doors off, and then the city of Burbank, I think, locked the saloon doors, which is hilarious because you can just crawl under, and that's what people ended up doing. And then they bolted the doors, and then they put police tape around it, and then you're right, they put up an 8-foot fence around it. And I went to
like a permanent structure fence.
Yeah.
It's not even like one of those ones at a construction site that's held down by like sandbags. It was
They're like, this
in
is
the
here
ground.
to stay. Yeah. And I went there a few times during the pandemic to show my support. I actually regret that I didn't go there more often. I should have made it like a twice a week thing. Do you feel like the people in your community supported you?
Without a doubt. And not only within the community. You know, it started very, very, very focused in the community. But we got national and international attention. And, you know, I think, and I know, last I talked to I think one of the children of the owner at Tin Horn Flats, you know, they're still fighting, but,
yes, they are.
You know, you look at what happened to them, and they were doing the right thing, but they didn't have enough support. And we were very fortunate in that we did. We had, I mean, that $750,000 legal bill was at least the burden was carried in a large way by people's generous donations, by the t-shirts that we wound up selling. I mean, we sold t-shirts and we didn't really make a dime off of them, but we didn't have to, we wouldn't have been able to finance that legal battle. You know, we would have eventually gone broke. So it was absolutely a collective effort. We would not have been able to do what we had done had we not had that support. And that's really something for people to consider. You know, you don't always have the opportunity to do something to the epic proportions of what the gym turned out to be. And we didn't even know it would. But people tend to discount the importance of their actions. Like you said, you're like, man, I wish I showed up more. Because we tend to think, and it's a critical flaw in the way that we interact with the world as individuals, and especially as citizens. We tend to think that our support doesn't matter. But you know, the case of the gym is an example where we absolutely would not have been able to do it had we not had that support. You know, and that's not just financially, that's emotionally, that's people coming to the gym. And we were having, I think we were averaging 800 people a day.
How do you even manage that? That's insane.
It was, I mean, it was a madhouse. It was all hands on deck. But people were so generous to us. And I mean, people drove, especially in the height of the battle, like where, you know, gyms weren't open anywhere. We had people traveling from multiple different states, you know, to take a day drive down from Connecticut, from New York, from parts of Pennsylvania, all parts of Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia. And we had people taking like vacations into the area to come and visit the gym. Yeah. And, you know, so yeah, absolutely. The support we got was critical. And, you know, if there's a takeaway from that, it's that, you know, even if you don't have a big part in the fight, it always matters you showing up. And that doesn't just mean for, you know, big COVID fights. That means your school board. That means your local elections. That means all of these things. You as an individual add a tremendous amount to that in more ways than I think most people really understand.
Yeah. And one of the most surprising aspects and regrettable aspects of COVID, I don't know how old you are, but I'm at the older end of millennials, and I was part of the generation who grew up with the food pyramid, and we were taught that carbs reign supreme, and that was one of the most important things, and that butter is bad, and you know, all of
meat's
these
bad,
things.
eggs are bad.
Yeah, that, you know, a hearty meat meal in the morning with eggs is a bad thing, that we should be eating cereal instead, which don't even get me started on that. But it kind of,
that's science too, apparently.
right. It kind of made sense to me, unfortunately, because of my already existing skepticism. It actually kind of was right in the wheelhouse of the government, that they didn't want us going to gyms, that they wanted us to be inside. They didn't want us to be outside getting natural vitamin D. So it's regrettable what they did. Unfortunately, to me, and I imagine to you as well, it wasn't that surprising.
No, it's not at all. I mean, when liquor stores were allowed to be open, but gyms weren't.
And strip clubs.
And strip clubs. Yeah. I mean, you could go get a lap dance outside, but you could not work out, which is absolutely incredible. I mean, I don't, getting a masked lap dance, I don't even know why anybody, like, it just, none of that makes sense. But yeah, no, none of it surprised me.
For strippers, that maybe they need something other than a mask to protect.
Yeah, they don't need anything on but a mask, as long as, you know, as long as it's an N95 or whatever they wear, the special ones. No, none of this surprised me. You know, I've been in the health industry for years. By no means am I a doctor, but I've worked with the human body for going on 2 decades now. And common sense told me that everything that they were doing was against health, you know, and we've seen this. We've seen this for years. I mean, we used to have doctors who recommended brands of cigarettes in advertisements, right. You know, so the medical establishment and the government are sort of one and the same. You know, they're controlled by the same people that control the government, and, you know, and so on. So the advice that they give is never sound. And you look into most of these organizations that give this advice, places like the ADA and all this stuff, and you look at their funding, and it's no surprise that they tell you to eat Cheerios and not to go to the gym, and that eggs are somehow bad for you. You know, so it's knowing that, I was very skeptical from the beginning. Correct. And you know, again, that's something that people should take away from it, is you should always be skeptical of what these people are saying. You know, you should always assume that they're lying, and then work towards the truth. Whatever they say, assume it's a lie, research it, and find your way to the truth. And they may be telling the truth. Every once in a while they do. But everything that any authority tells you, or that anybody tells you, you should approach with skepticism. It doesn't matter if they're the government. It doesn't matter if they're a doctor. It doesn't matter if they're Anthony Fauci, the king of science. That's something that we should adopt, is just that very healthy skepticism towards anybody telling you how to live your life.
Absolutely. I want to finish up with your book, Find Your Hill. Tell us about it.
So I wrote that on the back end. On the back end of COVID, I wound up running for Congress, which was an adventure in and of itself. Made a couple of mistakes. I ran at the federal level, and I should have definitely ran at the state level. I didn't have a full understanding of how these things worked, and you have a much bigger impact if you do get elected at the state and at the local level. But on the back end of that, I wanted to share some of the experiences that I had, because there was a lot that I learned in these last couple of years. So I wrote a book about it, but I didn't want to just write the story of being like a hero. I feel like that's really cheap and easy to talk about the good things that you've done, because it gives people the idea that somehow maybe they can't do that either, right? Like it's people carry around their BS and their failures, and they think they're not strong enough or brave enough or whatever it is. And so I start the story kind of with a little backstory about myself. And I haven't lived a perfect life. I've made a ton of mistakes. I've done bad things. I've made wrong choices. I've made weak choices. And I wanted to give people a little bit of insight into the fact that you're just one choice away from doing something phenomenal. So talk about my backstory a little bit, and the lessons that have been learned, especially in the COVID battle, and again with Congress, and try to weave as many little pieces of what I learned along the way into the story, and leave people with the premise that I just kind of talked about, that your actions are way more powerful than you think that you are, and you think that they are, and somebody has told you along the way that you're just one person and you won't make a difference. But if you would have asked me 4.5 years ago, you ever think that you could have the impact on people that you have, I would have said the very same lie. And we were just two gym owners in a sleepy suburb of New Jersey, and our actions sort of reverberated around the world.
Well, I would argue with you on one point. I think there are a lot of people who consider you a hero, especially in your community. So to that end, I agree with you on the whole machine of running for federal office. You can definitely have a bigger impact at the local level. Do you foresee a local or state election in your future?
So I'm pretty involved down here in the local community. I live in North Florida. We have like a great sheriff in our county, in St. Johns County, and I've been working with that campaign, just sort of showing up to events, sort of learning the political landscape around here, because it is different everywhere. Not only are there different players and different demographics, but each state operates a little bit differently in terms of their local elections. So I've been involved down here. There's also a county commissioner that I'm working with who's a fantastic guy, and is sort of a guy who doesn't want to run but feels like he has to, which I think are the best candidates. So I'm working closely with that, and probably next election cycle I'll consider like a very local office to just kind of get started and get involved, because the local stuff, we need to solidify our local areas first. Until then, we're just sort of throwing ice cubes at the sun, running for federal elections. And that's not to discourage anybody, but you look at some of the fighters that we do have, people like Thomas Massey, who is a great federal politician, and he has great ideas, but he's outnumbered in ways that make it almost impossible for him to do something. So, focus on the local and the state first. That's where I'll be focusing my energy, and you just look at some of the local areas that had good sheriffs, that had, sound governments. And even when the state said do this, they said no. There was a lot of that in California, and a lot of the counties outside of LA County and stuff like that. So
even our LA County sheriff at some point was like, okay, we are dealing with criminal violence, murders, rapes. We're not going to be enforcing this.
Yeah, I think that was at the point that they wanted everybody to have a Vax card to get into like any public building, and he was like, "I'm not doing this," which is hats off to him. He probably, exactly. So I'll be certainly involved, and I'll get more involved in where I'm at here. And it's important, even when you do live in a place like Florida, which we celebrate for being one of the better states. it's still important to be involved. Complacency is how we got here. That's how blue states turned blue. And that's how these places got like this. So it's important to stay on guard no matter where you are and to get involved in any capacity you can, even if it's just showing up for people.
Yeah, I always tell my audience, I understand that there are these sexy elections, these sexy positions, United States representative, United States senator. It's sexy. I get it. At the same time, the non-sexy jobs, the non-sexy positions are the places where you can have the most impact. And I absolutely applaud you. I applaud you for your heroism. I also applaud you for your humility, because I think you're right. I think for a lot of people, they feel like they've made mistakes in life, or they don't have the strength or the fortitude to make that decision that can have such an impact on so many people. And I applaud you for both sides of that, because it's really important to have that in someone who is now a public figure like you are.
Thank you.
Ian Smith, it's been an absolute honor. Thank you so much for being here. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media.
You can find me on Instagram and on X at Ian Smith Fitness, same place I've always been.
I love it. I love it. Ian Smith, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully you'll come back on soon and we'll get an update on you on how the maneuverings are going and moving in the direction of possibly a campaign for local or state office. We appreciate you. All right, everybody, we're going to take a very quick break and we'll be right back after this with more Small Business Saturday. All right, everybody, welcome back. I want to applaud Ian again for something that I think is hard to admit, because oftentimes when people become kind of heroes of the moment, heroes during COVID, there is a tendency, and it's a human tendency, it's a natural tendency to kind of succumb to that success and succumb to that fame and that notoriety, and to become this person that you weren't necessarily before. And Ian seems like since the very beginning, when I started, in preparation for this podcast, I obviously watched videos of his video interviews and news clips and things like that. And he just seems to be the same guy that he was back then. And I mean that in a really wonderful way. He, as you can tell from that interview, he is a patriot. He cares about this country. And I don't fault him for moving down to Florida, because my goodness, every day that I'm here in Los Angeles, I wish I could go to Florida. It's not in the cards right now, because I feel like there's still some fight left in me for California. And many of you know the passion that I have for what I consider to be my ministry here in Los Angeles, and some of the signs that there could be revival to come in Southern California. And I certainly don't want to miss that. But there is not a single day that passes that I don't wish that I could go somewhere like Florida, or to my home state of Alabama, or the state where I was born, Tennessee, or basically anywhere. But I love that he has taken the fight to Florida as well. He's not having to fight the state in Florida, thank God, because Florida has a governor in Ron DeSantis, and state legislators and state legislators and state senators and mayors all across the Sunshine State who believe in freedom and believe in the ideals that our country was founded on. But he talked about running in office, and obviously he ran in New Jersey and got spanked because it was an extremely blue area. But it's important for all of us to get involved on that local level. And even if you're in a red state, y'all, red states are some of the worst offenders for rhinos. That's the crazy thing, is that you look at states, and I had a conversation a few years ago. I was supporting a candidate who ran against James Langford. I'll just put it out there. Senator James Langford, and I was supporting a candidate who was running to primary him. And he was talking about the rhino situation in Oklahoma, and how the dynamic in very, very red states is such that people they're just very comfortable with the fact that they are in a Republican state, and they don't necessarily show up to vote. So when it comes to someone who perhaps has been in office for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in some cases, their whole life, they've made a career out of being a politician, then people aren't really paying attention to what they're doing. They're not paying attention to whether they are even listening to their constituents. And in this new era of establishment Republicanism versus America First Republicanism, we've all got to start paying more attention. And for people like Ian running for, or possibly running for office in Florida, I think that it's important for all of us to follow his lead. But let's get back to the fortitude that he had to have to fight the state of New Jersey. 165,000 fines. And that was just, those were just the fines for him staying open on a day-to-day basis. As you heard, $15,000 per offense. So per day. And that's not on top, or that's not all, especially when you consider the millions of dollars that he had to expend on legal counsel and all the things that go against fighting a state like New Jersey and Phil Murphy. I wish that there were more people like this across the country. As I mentioned to Ian, we had a restaurant here in Burbank called Tin Horn Flats. And, you know, Ian kind of called me out a little in that interview for not supporting them more. And I couldn't agree more. I only went there a few times during COVID, and I wish that I had gone a few times a week. I wish that I had been there for that business, and they are now fighting the system. They are now tied up in legal battles. But that was my chance to really fight back and to support the machine, or to support someone who was fighting the machine. And I didn't show up, and I sorely, sorely regret that. And every time I drive down that road in Burbank, where there is a shuttered restaurant formerly called Tin Horn Flats, I'm kicking myself. And you know, I think that there were a lot of things I did during COVID to speak up and to fight back, but that was a really easy way that I could have done it, and, you know, held events there to support them and help them out. So Lord have mercy. Let's hope that nothing like this ever happens again in our lifetime. But if it does, I'm going to make sure that I expend every penny that I can trying to help out businesses around me who are actually involved in the fight. If you know someone who you think would be a great guest for this podcast, I already have a few in mind that we have lined up who we're going to put out on this Saturday series for Small Business Saturdays. But if you know a business, please let me know, because I want to have companies from all over this country, because I know that fortunately we have listeners on the regular podcast Monday, Wednesday, Friday from all over this country. So I don't want to leave out any state. I don't want to leave out any locality. I want to highlight these businesses. I consider that to be part of my mission in saving Main Street in America. And I would appreciate your recommendation. So you can find me on social media practically anywhere at Amanda Head, and the podcast has its very own X account at Furthermore Pod. And remember, our regular podcast, the audio version, comes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You can find it on iTunes, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, all of the podcasting platforms. Thank you all so much for being here on this Saturday. I hope you have a very blessed rest of your weekend, and I will see you, hear ya on Monday.